Trump's moves today made clear he's deliberately testing the unity and strength of the alliance. The question is, why? The only beneficiary of Trump's havoc is Vladimir Putin, who's been rooting for the collapse of NATO since the days of the Cold War. Putin said as much last year, telling NBC's Megyn Kelly it would help Russia if NATO ultimately fell apart.
President Putin, does all this squabbling over NATO help Russia?
Ссора вокруг НАТО?
Squabbles around NATO, do they help Russia? Well, in a sense that maybe they should completely be falling apart, then that will help. But we don't see that falling apart just yet.
Well, there's a little smile in the little guy. Joining me right now is Richard Blumenthal, Democratic Senator from Connecticut. David Miliband, who's the former British foreign minister and Labour Party politician. He's now the presidency of the International Rescue Committee. David Corn is Washington bureau chief, of course, for Mother Jones, and an MSNBC analyst. And Yamiche Alcindor is White House correspondent for the NewsHour on PBS and an MSNBC contributor. She joins us now from NATO's summit in Brussels. I want to start with Senator Blumenthal. You know, I really do believe he's embarrassing us over there. And I don't just mean progressives or Democrats or even independents or reasonable Trump-resistant Republicans. Everybody. Why would he start a fight in the kitchen with all of NATO? You look like he just wanted a fight.
He is essentially playing from Vladimir Putin's playbook. That Vladimir Putin wants to sow discord and division, not only among our European allies, with us, but also within them. In other words, within Germany, emboldening the right wing, which is also Trump's playbook. And so it is really an insidious, not just embarrassing, it is disgraceful and destructive and a threat to our national security. And one more point here, Chris, and you'll appreciate this point. These allies have stood by our side. They've shed blood, sacrificed lives, spent treasure through world wars, the Korean War, now Iraq and Afghanistan. We're going to need these allies at some point, and we are antagonizing the folks who are our friends just so the president, Donald Trump, can create space for possible concessions. Even more alarming than what he has just said, disgraceful as it is, are the concessions that he may make to Vladimir Putin when he meets with him in Helsinki.
David Miliband, you know, when you read about Yalta back in '45, Roosevelt did tilt towards Stalin. He did sort of mistreat, I think, or at least teased Winston Churchill to sort of win favor, or to chat up, if you will, to use a British term, to chat up Stalin. What's going on here? Is there any possible reason to believe this is good for the world, that Trump is really dumping on our allies in Europe?
Well, Chris, I think teasing is different from raising, and you do need to have a historical perspective. I think it's right that you look back across the last 70 years, and this has been the longest period of peace and prosperity across the Atlantic that we've ever known. And it's been good not just for Europeans, but for Americans as well. President Trump said last month that he thought that the European Union had been set up to humiliate America and to do down America. And I think that's at the heart of this zero-sum view of the world that he is propagating. I think it's important to say that Europeans are in a strange way being united by the attacks that are coming on them. Across the political spectrum, Europeans are staring in disbelief, but they're also recognizing that they have to take more matters into their own hands. And I think you're going to see a greater European unity in the face of these extraordinary attacks, which are, of course, allied to the trade assault that is going on at the moment as well.
Churchill said that John Foster Dulles, our foreign minister, our Secretary of State back in the 50s, was a bull that carried his China shop around with him. Do you people in Britain, and you're from Britain, of course, you were a leader over there, do you think Trump's got a brain soup problem, that he somehow has to have fights, that this is how he realizes himself, fighting with somebody? Even he picked a fight with the president of NATO there across the table at breakfast. It seems to me he just wanted to be seen on television fighting.
Well, certainly there's the pugilism of American politics is very much understood across Europe. What people can't understand is that he's picking a fight less with the General Secretary of NATO, more with Mrs. Merkel, who seems to be very much in his sights. Of course, Mrs. Merkel knows what it means to be a captive of the Soviet Union, since she grew up in East Germany, and rather tartly rebuked the president this afternoon in pointing out that she knew what it meant to be free of Soviet domination. Of course, Germany has taken a much tougher line with the Russians, and I think the global context is important. Remember, we're living at a time, this is the week when germ warfare has been used on British streets. It's a time when we know that there's been cyber warfare against the Baltic states, never mind the invasions of Georgia and Ukraine. It doesn't make you an old Cold Warrior to point out that a revanchist Russia, weak in its economy at home, is striking out in a very dangerous world way abroad. And a divided NATO, frankly, is no NATO at all at a time when Russia is thinking about how it can gain further strategic advantage.
Last question to you in this segment. Do you think Trump is responding to the dossier? He's afraid of what Trump's got on him.
I mean,
what Putin's got.
I don't think that's driving out. Frankly, living and working in New York, you can see that there's domestic politics at play here. There's a group of Americans who are clearly riled by what they perceive to be European progress in the face of American stagnation. Frankly, the statistics don't bear that out. Certainly, the period of transatlantic cooperation has been marked by gains in prosperity on both sides. It's been a genuine win-win. And of course, the German hosting of American troops on German soil for training and other matters is actually a contribution to American security rather than a negation of it.
Yamiche, do you think the president's playing for the home crowd?
Well, when President Trump blasted really into this Brussels summit and went after Germany, there are some people who think, oh, he's playing right into the hands of Russia. He's doing all this stuff because he wants to antagonize our allies. But in reality, there's also this idea that he's projecting what people say about him onto Germany. People have said that President Trump is influenced by Russia. They're saying, obviously, that the Mueller investigation is looking at whether or not Russia had an influence on his campaign and colluded. And so he has to then really have hand his base the win and say, well, what are you doing for us? So in some ways, I think that he was definitely playing to his base. He was having this idea that he wanted to look like a strong man in Europe. And remember, as a candidate, he was very clear that he was going to antagonize our allies. There are a lot of things that President Trump does that people think he's backing away from. But in this case, he's actually keeping his promise. He's basically in line with what he said he was going to do. So I think in this case, he actually is definitely thinking about home when he does this.
It's funny, we're watching a picture of Yamiche now where he's posing with another fellow there, another one of these representatives in Brussels, and he made a point of had to get his shoulder in front of the other guy's shoulder. Anyway, yesterday, President Trump said that his upcoming encounter with Putin, scheduled for Monday over in Helsinki, Finland, would actually be easier than dealing with NATO in the UK. Here he goes.
NATO has not treated us fairly, but I think we'll work something out. We pay far too much, and they pay far too little. So I have NATO, I have the UK, which is in somewhat turmoil, and I have Putin. Frankly, Putin may be the easiest of them all. Who would think? Who would think?
Well, we think so. It's another indication that Trump has no problem trashing America's closest allies, while at the same time he has consistently appeared willing to do almost anything he says, to get along with Russia. Here he goes.
If we have a good relationship with Russia, believe me, that's a good thing. Be a fantastic thing if we got along with Putin and if we got along with Russia. Yeah, I think we got along very well, and I think that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I hope that we do have good relations with Russia. I say it loud and clear. I've been saying it for years. I want to be able, because I think it's very important, to get along with Russia. I think I could have a very good relationship with Russia and with President Putin. And if I did, that would be a great thing. If we can get along with Russia, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But getting along with Russia would be a good thing, not a bad thing. And just about everybody agrees to that, except very stupid people.
Well, there we are. Let's get back to David Corn. You've been writing about this. You got a great book on it, Russian Roulette. What is driving him to trash our good friends of decades, in fact, a century, to win some sort of love from Vladimir Putin? What's he up to?
Have you ever heard him say it'd be a good thing if we had good relationships with our allies, with Germany, with Canada? He doesn't say that about anyone else other than Russia.
So what's he up to?
I think there's some psychological...
You believe the dossier is driving him?
No, not necessarily.
Do you believe there's a quid pro quo from the election when he was helped to win this election by the Russians?
I don't think that explains his love affair with Vladimir Putin. There's something psychological. When it comes to Justin Trudeau, Angela Merkel, I don't think he believes he's an equal. And I think he resents the fact that they want to be equals with him. They're like, they're just pesky pesky little allies. And when he looks at Vladimir Putin, he sees a guy who he wants to be accepted by and who he wants to emulate as a strong man.
But Merkel's far more impressive a leader than Putin.
Well, she's a woman to begin with, so I don't think that counts much for him. And she's not an oligarch, strongman, autocrat, corrupt, kleptocratic leader, which is what he wants
Senator,
to
what do you
be.
make of it? There's your best shot. Why is he kissing up, to be blunt about it, Vladimir Putin at the expense of all our historic allies? What's he up to?
I think he is either beholden to Putin, and he is because Putin intervened in the election to help him, or he's an impulsive, spoiled teenager who sort of wants to curry favor with someone he admires. But the mere fact you're asking the question, Chris, is the most dangerous and frightening part of this whole thing. And let me make this point, and it may be the most important I have to make. Donald Trump doesn't speak for America. The Senate of the United States, even as he went to Europe, passed a resolution saying to NATO, we are with you. We want you to be with us. We are not abandoning this historic relationship. That resolution was approved 98-2.
Wow. Well, the NATO alliance was founded at the outset of the Cold War as a deterrent against Soviet expansion into Europe. Of course, most of us grew up knowing that. It was used as a counterbalance against the USSR's own alliance known as the Warsaw Pact, which included their satellite states in Central and Eastern Europe. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact dissolved. However, NATO expanded right up to Russia's borders to include many of the countries the USSR once controlled, like Poland and Hungary and the Baltic states. And you can see why Putin is a little angry here, because all his little so-called, they weren't his allies, they were his satellites, are now on the western side, and he's all alone out there. Yamiche, the feeling that I get is that that Trump is going over to Vladimir Putin, who lost the Cold War. His country did. He's a KGB operative, probably one of the killers from the KGB. He's now sitting there with no allies, no satellites, and he wants to somehow ruin our deal because the American alliance with Europe is as strong as ever. But why is Trump doing this for him? Why is he breaking up the West the way history broke up the East?
Well, I'll say this. Unlike the G7, which is really an economic club, which is really a trade club, President Trump has to do a lot to get out of NATO. He has to actually get out of a treaty that was started in 1949. And even though that he has all this rhetoric and is talking a lot, I spoke to NATO sources here, a lot of people from different countries, as well as State Department officials, and they said that President Trump's rhetoric isn't actually changing day-to-day operations. That said, President Trump could actually loosen U.S. connections to NATO by decreasing troops or giving less money to NATO. There are a lot of people who are very worried that when he sits down with Vladimir Putin, that he's going to maybe give away some of that stuff. NATO allies don't really know what to think at this point because he had such a raucous day today. They're very, very worried about that. So we really won't know until Monday, until after that meeting, what he does. But I think President Trump wants to look like a strongman. It goes back to that idea that he wants to talk to his base and wants to really feel as though he's not being taken advantage of.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.